Managing unconscious bias. You've probably heard this term before, but what actually is unconscious bias, or implicit bias as it's sometimes called? Well, it's the beliefs we have and the assumptions that we make about others without even realising. This can affect the way that we speak to and treat other people, both positively and negatively. Who does it affect? Unconscious bias affects everyone, and no doubt we all have it. But due to historical societal norms and gender stereotyping, women tend to experience more negative unconscious bias in the workplace than men do. Put plainly, we're treated differently due to our gender. And for some women, this is compounded by unconscious bias they experience because of other parts of their identity too, such as their sexual orientation, race, or ethnicity. This might look like being perceived as weaker than male counterparts, like being spoken over in meetings or having less senior male colleagues, being mistaken as your boss by others. When it happens, it can be really hard to call out. Let me give you an example. I spent 10 years on the board of a charity run by the royal family. When I joined this board and attended my first meeting at Buckingham Palace, I was terrified. Before the meeting began, we met for coffee. I mustered up all my courage. I walked up to the first director and I put my hand out to introduce myself. He put his empty coffee cup in it and then turned and walked away. He thought I was one of the waiting staff from the palace. I was mortified. I was so embarrassed and I felt really awkward. Do you want to know what I said to him? I said nothing. Nothing. And I really regret that now because I look back on it and I realise that my silence sounded like acceptance. But I didn't want to make a fuss. I didn't know what to say. I didn't have the courage to speak up because I didn't know how to challenge him about this assumption he'd made. That's the only reason a young woman would be in a Buckingham Palace in his mind, would be to serve him coffee, rather than to be his equal on the board of trustees. I could also see, though, that it was unconscious. He hadn't meant to destroy my confidence, but he had. For years it bothered me that I hadn't challenged his behaviour, and yet I continued to let things like this happen to me in the workplace. Then I had 2 daughters, and I witnessed the same things happening unconsciously to them. That was like the turning point. The day I saw my daughter's school peg and noticed that her name card above it read Heidi the Unicorn, and then I looked either side and saw Sam the scientist and Matthew the mathematician, that's when it changed. You see, I realised the boys could aspire to have brilliant minds, whereas my daughter could only aspire to be a mythical creature. My silence could no longer sound like acceptance. It was time to be a bit more courageous, to find some techniques that I could use to challenge people's unconscious bias and learn to speak up, not just for myself, but also for others. Yet speaking up is difficult, isn't it? I mean, what if it becomes confrontational? What if they don't understand my point of view? What if I get emotional when I try to explain how their words or actions have affected me? And will it make any difference anyway? Those were the questions running around my head, so I'm guessing that they may be running around your head too. There are 3 techniques that I found.